Alright guys, here we go. It's been a while because I've been having troubles with technical issues, but I'm back and I'm here to talk about this Alabama versus Washington matchup. I'm going to have a lot of videos coming out hopefully over the next few days, starting out with Alabama versus Washington, the preview, some of the statistics, some of the matchups, and of course I've been analyzing and watching a lot of Washington football, so I'm going to talk about what I've seen and how that matches up with Alabama. Then I'm going to try to get into a bit of the Ohio State and Clemson matchup, but I'm going to get the Alabama-Washington out first so that you can be prepared for that game, because I know most of you are Alabama fans on the channel. So, here we go. One of the first things I want to talk about was the defensive statistics, and I have mine right up here in my numbers that I'm going to go through. Starting with Alabama. Number one in the NCAA in total defense. I think they've had, if I'm looking at the numbers right, 817 plays ran against them, only giving up 3,222 yards, which is basically less than 4 yards per play they're giving up. Now, Washington, on the other hand, has the number 11 total defense in the NCAA. 899 plays run against them. They've given up 4,110 yards, which is about 4.5 yards per play. Alabama's only given up 247.8 yards per game. Washington's given up 316.2 yards per game. So about 50, a little bit more than 50-yard difference between the teams. Alabama has given up 14 total touchdowns all season by opposing offenses. By opposing offenses, it's not including special teams or defense. They're giving up 14 touchdowns by the offenses. Washington, under that same metric, has given up 27 touchdowns total by opposing offenses. So Alabama's 14. That's a 13 touchdown difference. And some of that, so I'm going to say, well, it depends on the quality of offense, which I'm not going to argue, just talking about numbers right now. Alabama, number one rushing offense. No, number one rushing. Number one against rushing. Number one in rushing defense is what I'm trying to say. Opponents have run the ball 405 times against Alabama. Alabama has given up 824 rushing yards. That's 2.03 yards per rush. That's absolutely amazing, and you're going to see how amazing that is when I actually talk about some of the other statistics. As a matter of fact, I'll go ahead and say this. Alabama has given up 824 yards on 405 rushing attempts. The next closest opponent has given up 1,200 yards. Alabama has the premium on rushing defense. The next best rushing defense has given up 1,200 rushing yards. That's amazing. Alabama's run defense is amazing. You can tell that just from watching. The teams don't run the ball in Alabama. They've only given up 3 touchdowns all season, only given up 63.4 rushing yards per game. Washington, on the other hand, their rushing defense isn't bad, but it's not as good as Alabama's, of course. It can't be. Alabama's the number one. Washington has the number 18 rush defense in the country. 464 rushing attempts. They've given up 1,606 yards rushing, which is still pretty good because they're only giving up 3.46 rushing yards per game. And their run defense is actually one of the strengths of their team. A lot of people don't talk about that, but they actually stop the run pretty well. It's just that they're not quite as good as Alabama's rushing defense, which nobody's is. They've given up, if I'm looking at the numbers right, I think 18 rushing touchdowns, giving up 123.5 rushing yards per game. Compared to Alabama, though, is really tough to try to win in that statistic. Now, in terms of pass defense, Alabama is number 15 against the pass. 412 attempts against Alabama, and they've only given up 217 completions. That is only 52%. Opponents are completing only 52% of their passes against Alabama. So Alabama is making opponents throw the ball a lot to get their completions. 11 touchdowns given up passing. Washington, on the other hand, has The number 22 pass defense, which is not that far off. Their secondary is pretty good. They have some tall cornerbacks, strong cornerbacks. 435 attempts against Alabama, so very similar. They've given up 250 completions, which is 57%. So Washington, as well as holding opponents under 60% completion percentage, it's not quite as good as Alabama's giving up 52 and they're giving up 57, but that is still pretty good to hold opponents under 60%. 60%, especially in this age of spread, fast-paced offenses where you throw the ball very short and get easy completions. It means they're forcing opponents to throw the ball a little bit further and not get the completions. But still 5% difference between Alabama and Washington. Now, the interesting thing is that Alabama and Washington's yards per attempt and yards per completion are a bit similar because the numbers are a bit similar. Alabama's giving up 5.82 yards per attempt and 11.05 yards per completion. Washington's giving up 5.76 yards per attempt and giving up 10 yards per completion, which says this. You got to make this caveat first. No matter what, the average yards per completion is always going to be higher than the yards per attempt when you're talking about good defenses. If your defense is good and you force opponents to only complete 50% of their passes, all of their yards are going to come on the other 50%, meaning that just by the way of the numbers, by the nature of numbers, the statistics for the completion percentage is going to be higher. Because if you are having a good pass defense and you only allow opponents to throw for 3,000 yards total, let's say you allow opponents to throw for, well, not say that much, 2,500 yards total. If they completed those passes, if they got 2,500 passing yards on only 250 passes, that means that the passes that they did hit got them a few yards, which is to be expected if you're stopping them running the ball, meaning that they have to throw the ball more. And if you have to throw the ball more than likely you're going to get some passes, which is indicative of how Alabama plays on defense. And I know Alabama more so than Washington, but I've seen it a little bit from Washington too. The way these two defenses play is they shut down your strength, they play really hard on defense, and they force you to make plays. Alabama is so aggressive that they will play man-to-man coverage, and they'll force the quarterback to throw the ball down the field and make perfect throws. And all Alabama fans know, and everybody who watches Alabama football knows, when Alabama has been beaten down the field, it's because their cornerbacks were playing man-to-man coverage, and the receiver made a great play. Texas A&M did it. Ole Miss did it earlier in this year. The receivers just made some really great plays, even though our cornerbacks were right there in the play. And even sometimes they just busted coverage. So busted coverage and receivers making great plays. And I saw that a bit in the Washington games too. When people completed passes on them, it's because the guys made good passes, or maybe they had a little bit of undisciplined play where they let receivers run out. But yeah, for the most part, like I said, this 50% completion rate tells you that these defenses are making it very hard on opposing offenses to just go out there and complete passes. So put it like this: you'll know if your team or your opponent has a good passing game if their yards per attempt is high and their yards per completion is lower, which is really interesting, right? You would think that it would be the opposite, but no, because what that's saying is that they're completing more and more of their passes, and therefore the number doesn't fluctuate really big when they do complete a pass. So let's say you had 2,500 yards passing and you got that on 250 completions out of 300 passing attempts. Your completion, your yards per completion is going to be lower, but that means you were more efficient with the ball, meaning that you moved the ball up and down the field in shorter to maybe intermediate passes, which means your offense was clicking, as opposed to 250 completions out of 400 passing attempts, out of 450 passing attempts, meaning that you really, really had to work to get those passes, and most of the time you were missing. So that's what these two defenses do to offenses. They make them work so hard to just get the completions that they do get. And the truth is that Alabama does it a little bit better than Washington, only making opponents do 52%, where Washington makes the opponents do 57%. So yeah, I say all that just to make all those points. Actually, I explained all that without. I'll go ahead and read how I said it. I probably didn't have to waste as much time on this on the way I explained it now. But what I said was that opponents have to throw the ball about double the amount of times to get a completion. About 2 times as normal to get a completion. So when opponents do complete a ball, they average about 10 to 11 yards, basically a first down. These numbers can be a bit inflated though because of all the yards are coming from a smaller number of completions. You can say the opponents are only able to complete explosive like passes on these teams, which makes sense based on the film, as I was saying. These secondaries defend basic routes well. The pass yards comes from receiver making great plays, or DBs not playing the ball well, or blown coverages. And there you go. So that's just the initial defensive statistics matchup. Let me know what you think about this video. As I said, and as you notice, Alabama has a bit of that's the advantage statistically. There's a lot more that factors into it, but that's my first video on this matter. Looking forward to giving you a bit of what I saw in the film and maybe some more about the offenses later on. Thanks for paying attention.